A fake cop stepped into my house, zip ties ready, eyes locked on my teenage son. "We're detaining the suspect," he said, right as my son whispered, "Should I call Grandpa?" The air shifted. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. It was a sleepy Thursday morning in our quiet Florida suburb. Birds chirped in brittle bursts from the hedges, sprinklers clicked and hissed across dewy lawns, and the air carried that humid stillness only found before the sun's real heat kicked in. My teenage son, Dylan, sat at the breakfast table, hunched over a bowl of cereal and scrolling through his phone, the light from the screen flickering across his sleepy face. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee, the ceramic warm in my hands, the silence familiar and comforting, until it shattered. A brutal, closed fist pounding echoed through the house. Not a knock, a demand. Fist to wood. I flinched. The dog barked once from the back door, then fell silent, unsure. It wasn't just the volume, it was the rhythm, aggressive, unapologetic, completely at odds with the easy rhythm of our morning. I moved to the door, heart accelerating as if my body had recognized something I hadn't yet processed. Two men stood on the porch. Both wore dark green uniforms, too tactical for maintenance guys, too casual for cops. There were no official patches, no shield, no county crest, just cheap Velcro rectangles with HOA compliance officer printed in blocky white letters. One of them was thick-necked, the kind of build that came from too much lifting and not enough thought. A buzz cut flattened against his scalp, wraparound sunglasses hiding his eyes. The other, leaner, had a permanent sneer curling one side of his lip. Neither smiled. Buzzcut stepped forward, not asking permission. He didn't look at me. His eyes locked on Dylan through the glass behind me. He pointed. "We need to take him in for violating HOA Code 7.3c. Unauthorized property alterations," he barked. Not said. Barked. Like a man used to being obeyed. I blinked. Dylan? My Dylan, who couldn't even parallel park without apologizing to the curb? He'd installed a tire swing over the weekend, a project he'd planned for weeks, using an old tire from his grandfather's shed and a length of nylon rope. He was proud of it. Had even made a TikTok showing the whole process. That was it. That was all. "What exactly are you accusing my son of?" I asked, voice low, barely hiding the tremor beneath. Buzzcut didn't respond. He simply reached toward his belt where two black zip ties hung, rigid and waiting. Tactical grade, the kind used to bind wrists in riot control. My breath hitched. He wasn't bluffing, and that's when my blood ran cold. The second man, thinner and meaner looking, spoke with a syrupy smugness that made my stomach tighten. "Under Section 7.3c, unauthorized additions can lead to juvenile detainment. It's all in the bylaws." He said it like a man who had waited his whole life to wield a clipboard and finally got his shot at playing sheriff. My grip tightened on the doorframe. "Show me the law," I said, slow and steady, enunciating every word like a warning. But Buzzcut didn't blink. He didn't reach for a document. He didn't pull out a citation. He simply shifted his weight forward, boot landing on the threshold like he owned the space. Like my home was now part of his little pretend jurisdiction. "Step back. Now," I said, this time louder, teeth clenched around each syllable. Regret crept in like rising water. I should have called the police the second they showed up. Not because I was afraid, but because these men weren't just overstepping. They were deliberately trying to provoke fear, and I didn't know how far they'd go. Behind me, Dylan hovered near the kitchen island, clutching his phone like a lifeline. He had that look, part deer in headlights, part brave soldier pretending not to shake. He raised the phone slowly, angling it just enough to start filming, and whispered without looking at me, "Mom." Should I call Grandpa? A chill moved through my spine like a sudden breeze through the bones. James Whitaker, my father-in-law. The man who had spent 2 decades shaping future FBI agents into weapons of precision, tactical response, psychological defense, advanced threat assessment. He hadn't touched a badge in years, but everything he'd ever taught came from muscle memory, not manuals. In retirement, he smelled like sawdust and soil. But I knew the fire behind those tired blue eyes hadn't dulled. I pressed his name on my screen and brought the phone to my ear. Buzzcut saw. They both saw. And something shifted. Their posturing stiffened. Thin Man tilted his head like he was watching a chess piece move he didn't expect. Buzzcut didn't hesitate. He stepped through the door without waiting for an invitation. "You don't get to make phone calls," he snapped. "We're detaining the suspect." Just like that. No authority, no warrant, just an authoritarian fantasy given legs and tactical boots. And in that moment, something inside me calcified. Hatred. Not hot and messy, but cold and precise. I hated the look in their eyes. I hated how they spoke about my son like he was property. I hated the smugness of men who thought fear was a shortcut to power. But I kept the line open. Let them talk. They had no idea who was on the other end. It took him 10 minutes. 10 minutes that felt like an hourglass turned sideways, where time held its breath and dread sank deeper with every grain. The 2 so-called compliance officers didn't let up. They circled us like wolves that had just discovered their prey wasn't armed. Their language grew looser but more menacing, nonsense phrases like statutory escalation, custodial discretion, and holding protocols. All fabricated, each delivered with a tone designed to confuse, to coerce, to corner. I stood my ground, body half-angled in front of Dylan, who hadn't stopped recording. My left hand gripped my phone, still connected to James. My right held the old graphite-shafted 9-iron from the umbrella stand. It wasn't about what I could do with it. It was about the symbol. I was not surrendering my child to men in cosplay with clipboards. Then, finally, salvation thundered up the driveway in the form of a growling vintage Ford Bronco, its cherry-red paint dulled by time but not spirit. The noise cut through the neighborhood's stagnant tension like a war drum. The door creaked open. James Whitaker emerged, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a presence that said the theater was over. He didn't wear a badge or carry a gun. He didn't need to. His authority came from the gravity in his posture, the precise calm in his gaze. Every inch of him said, "I am not here to ask." His hoodie was faded and stretched thin over broad shoulders, the letters FBI almost ghosted from decades of wear. His jeans were frayed, his boots muddy. He looked like someone's tired grandpa after a long morning in the garden, until you looked into his eyes. Then you saw it. The precision, the calculation, the barely leashed storm. He said nothing at first, letting silence do the work. He walked up, each step measured like a man approaching a live wire. Then, finally, his voice landed like a gavel. "Badge numbers. Now." Buzzcut froze, his bravado crumbling in real time. Smugface sneered, tried to save face with a dismissive scoff. "We're with the HOA," he said, lips curling. "That's private enforcement." James didn't blink. "Then congratulations. You've just admitted to impersonating a federal officer on private property. You know the penalty? 5 years, minimum, per count." Buzzcut stumbled back a step. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just grinned, a slow, wolfish grin of a man who'd already won. Dylan, God bless him, never stopped filming. His hands were steady, his instincts sharper than any teenager should have needed to be at that age. Every reckless phrase, every falsified claim, every twitch of a hand toward the zip ties, captured frame by frame in unforgiving digital clarity. No shaky footage, no missing context. Just the raw, disturbing absurdity of grown men in fake uniforms trying to detain a minor in broad daylight on his own front lawn. James didn't need a badge to command the situation. The man could have interrogated a diplomat or disarmed a hostage-taker with the same quiet, surgical composure. His questions were precise scalpels, not shouted accusations, but measured probes designed to unravel the facade thread by thread. "How long have you been in compliance enforcement?" he asked, tone neutral but sharp. No answer. "What training have you received? Who certified you?" Still silence. "Who authorized this detainment?" Buzzcut blinked. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "We were hired through a security subcontractor," he finally offered, but James was already shaking his head. "Nope," he said, slicing through the excuse like a guillotine. "You're wearing tactical gear. You threatened to detain a civilian. That's impersonating a law enforcement officer, which means you violated at least 3 federal statutes I can name off the top of my head. And if I called someone from the Bureau right now, they'd find another 5 before lunch." Smugface's bravado withered. Beads of sweat pooled at his hairline and began their descent. His tongue darted out to wet, suddenly dry lips. Whatever imaginary badge of power he thought he wore was peeling off fast. By the time the real officers arrived, summoned not just by my frantic calls but by 3 separate neighbors who had been peering out their blinds like nervous sentinels, the show was over. Buzzcut and Smugface didn't even try to talk tough. They slouched, hands open, voices cracking, babbling nonsense about misunderstandings and informal authorizations. And then came the truth. They weren't on the HOA payroll. Hell, they weren't on any payroll. They were Craigslist mercenaries, recruited by Craig Durbin, the self-important chairman of our homeowners association. Apparently, Craig had decided the official channels were too slow, and that the neighborhood needed a more proactive enforcement strategy. So naturally, he turned to the internet, hired 2 unlicensed, untrained wannabe cops to walk the streets with zip ties and intimidation tactics. He didn't want order. He wanted control. Within 48 hours, Dylan's video exploded like a firecracker in dry grass. What started as a desperate attempt to document a bizarre and terrifying confrontation morphed, almost overnight, into a viral storm. The footage, crisp, unedited, and damning, spread across TikTok first, where his followers doubled, then tripled. By morning, it had breached Facebook and Twitter, where angry homeowners and legal analysts alike dissected every second. It hit 300,000 views before we even understood the full weight of what we had captured. The tone online was unanimous. Outrage, disbelief, then a collective call for accountability. Local news picked it up by day 3. The headline ran with brutal simplicity: "Fake HOA enforcers arrested for impersonating officers." Dylan's footage played on loop behind the anchor's shoulder. Buzzcut's aggressive posture, Smugface's derisive tone, James stepping forward like justice incarnate. Social media lit up again. Lawyers weighed in. Former HOA members from other neighborhoods shared eerily similar stories. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a snapshot of unchecked power fantasists trying to turn suburban rules into authoritarian theater. The fallout came fast. Craig Durbin, the self-appointed general of this failed suburban coup, resigned with a statement so bland it bordered on insulting. He blamed miscommunication, a misunderstanding of procedure, and temporary overreach. The community wasn't buying it. A civil lawsuit followed. Several residents filed jointly, citing emotional distress, violation of civil rights, and unlawful detainment threats. Craig went quiet. His porch lights stayed off. And then, of course, they came for James. news vans, camera crews, bloggers, podcasters. Everyone wanted the quote, the soundbite, the silver-haired ex-agent who stood like a wall between two frauds and a frightened boy. At first, he refused, said his days in the spotlight were over. But eventually, for Dylan's sake, he relented. The interview was simple. No makeup, no script, just a folding chair on our front lawn, the swing Dylan built still hanging behind him in the frame. "They picked the wrong family," James said, voice low, face still. "My grandson doesn't need a gun. He has the truth and 1.4 million followers." That line made the evening news, twice. The swing stayed up. The bylaws, previously buried in legalese and obscured behind closed-door board meetings, were rewritten. This time, with actual community input. Language was clarified. Enforcement rules stripped of ambiguity. There would be no more deputized egos, no more late-night code enforcers, no more intimidation behind mirrored shades. This neighborhood remembered what it felt like to be free, and made sure it would never forget. Late one evening, after the chaos had drained from the week like storm water down a sewer grate, I found myself on the porch with James. The world had quieted. The camera crews were gone, the social media frenzy dimmed to a low hum, and the neighborhood, once gripped by tension and paranoia, had settled into something that resembled normalcy again. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, casting the street in that warm, amber twilight that makes everything look softer, older. James sat in the weathered rocker beside me, cradling a glass of lemonade that sweated beads onto his calloused hand. His boots, still streaked with garden soil, tapped faintly against the porch floor. There was no urgency in his movements now, no tactical precision. Just presence. Stillness. He looked like a man who had finally earned the right to rest, but had chosen not to, just in case. Inside, Dylan's muffled laughter spilled through the open window. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing all evening. Comments, shares, messages from strangers thanking him for standing up, asking for advice, sending support. It was strange, surreal even, how quickly the boy who once hesitated to speak up in class had become a symbol of resistance with a few seconds of video and an iron spine. "You ever think you'd use your FBI training to fight HOA bullies?" I asked, the words escaping as more breath than voice, part joke, part genuine wonder. James chuckled. Not loud, not amused. More like the knowing exhale of a man who'd seen enough of the world to stop being surprised. He raised the glass to his lips and sipped before replying. "Evil doesn't always wear a mask, sweetheart," he said. "Sometimes it wears khakis and holds a clipboard." That line sat between us like gospel. I turned my gaze to the old oak tree at the edge of the yard. Its branches swayed in the breeze, casting long shadows across the lawn. From one limb, the tire swing creaked softly, spinning just a little. No kids played on it now, but it moved as if remembering, carrying echoes of resistance, of courage in rubber and rope. For once, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from victory or vindication, but the kind born from clarity. My son understood now. He knew that truth didn't need a megaphone, that family wasn't just blood. It was the shield we raise when the world tries to take something it has no right to touch. And his grandfather? Still the most dangerous man on the block.